Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized, where truth survives. And we have your back. We are on episode 66. We are bringing back our friend Michael McKay, a brilliant geopolitical analyst. We're going to talk a lot about why Ukraine is going to win this war and why Russia is the residue of an empire. So it's going to be a really good hour with him. Wow. And we're going to also be offering you guys some new slogans that you can share with your friends who might not understand just how important Ukraine winning this war is for the world, essentially. Hello, gentlemen. I'm Heidi Cuda, Jim Stewartson, High Fidelity. What's going on?
Russia will lose this war.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same old shit.
Well, let's just jump right into front loaded then.
Front loaded.
I could be wrong about this, but I would like to point out that I saw what Hi-Fi would call a chaos grenade occur in the last few days, where a lot of folks who are on the pro-democracy side of this battle started fighting each other over blue checks. And I just want to point out that, that's basically, in my mind, giving the chaos agent Elon Musk a bit of a win. So I just think that people need to remember to fight the fascists, my opinion, because there's been a lot of pearl clutching over who has a blue check, who doesn't have a blue check. I get it. But I also think that it was a successful way to divide people up from themselves. Any thoughts, gentlemen?
In troll culture, there's a thing called bait, right? And you throw the bait out there and you watch people fight over it, right? Because they're going for it. And then once they take the bait and you have them on the hook, well, then they're sucked in to whatever chaos it is you're causing. And I would like to say that I have watched a bunch of people who I originally thought were smart, intelligent, educated, well-read people take the bait, hook, line, and sinker. So, whatever.
Jim?
Can I just say Dr. Seuss is going to be introduced now because Dr. Seuss predicted everything. Dr. Seuss had a story called The Sneetches, and the Sneetches were about these big yellow, goofy-looking pot-bellied critters, half of whom had blue stars on their bellies, and half of whom did not. And the ones who didn't made fun of the ones who had the stars. And a guy named McFarty McBean, something like that, who an entrepreneur comes in with a machine. I'm not kidding you. The machine, if you pay $10, you can get the star taken off. Now, it was a yellow Sneetch with a green star, but Dr. Seuss was a very, very, very outspoken anti-Semite.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very, very important allegory to the stars that people had to wear in the Nazi regime if they were Jewish. And Elon Musk, it occurs to me, is doing the same thing but backwards, right? Not only did he take all of the sort of credibility away from anybody, but he's assigning credibility or assigning labels to people that he wants. Some people are getting these checks that don't want them, right? Because he's labeling them. He labeled Canadian Broadcasting 69% government, right? He's weaponizing the entire platform, all of it, every possible feature of it. This blue check thing is Chaos Ops 101. Do not fall for it. Thank you for coming to my unexpected TED Talk with the unexpected media accompaniment. Thank you.
That was amazing. And I'm so glad that I didn't even know we were going to go there, because I just wanted to throw it out there, because for the last 72 hours, people I respect are not fighting the fascists. They're fighting each other. And I just think it's really dumb. I get it. I understand it. But Jim,
They
thank you
took
for
the
that.
bait. They took the
Well,
bait, man.
let's just let's focus on,
Fighting
doing
fascists.
doing the labor of democracy and not trying to tear each other down. And so, yes, I feel like
Yeah.
it was a successful chaos operation.
If somebody wants to pay $8 for longer videos, I don't give a shit. Go ahead. It doesn't, like, I'm not gonna do it because I don't want to give that fucking Nazi any money. But it's a decision that people are entitled to make, and fucking who gives a shit? Let's move on.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on. At RadPod, or I guess our last episode, I teased the Biggest Loser story that I wrote about Trump using metrics. And I just, for people who aren't able to read this article because it's paywalled, you can always reach out to me directly. But I just wanted to point out some of the bullet points that I focused on in that article about Trump's metrics all trending downward. So he's got a favorability poll of 25%, lowest ever. Another poll shows him edging out Biden, even though people are screaming that it's not more. It's still important to know that at least at this time, at this poll, a hypothetical poll, Biden does beat Trump. In 2020, his big lie earned him $250 million in donations. Now it's around 12 million at the last time I calculated it. So the deficit is $238 million. So I want people to look at things like that. When he's handing out pizza, it's no big deal. I also showed all the losses the Republicans took in 2018, 2020, and 2022. So I feel like we have to, with Michael McKay, we talk a lot about anti-truth and how it's so prevalent. I think it's very important that we seek out facts where we can. Anything you guys want to say?
Well, all of it is absolutely true. But I saw there was another poll, an NBC News poll this morning, amongst Republican candidates, and Trump is at 46%, DeSantis is at 31%, and everybody else is in the tiny little single digits.
Yeah, that's to be expected. Yeah,
I understand. I'm just saying that it is a cult so bereft of anything that all they have left is this decaying asset, right? That nobody believes is president of or could ever be president of anything. They're kind of stuck with him. So it's going to be fascinating. There was a recent shout out by Donald Trump to arrest Mike Flynn at a Florida fascist gathering.
Yes, I saw that. That was very interesting. Very interesting, the different interpretations of that.
He has for a long time. And again, I keep saying this. Why did everybody say hang Mike Pence? Because somebody wanted there to be a vacancy. I'm telling you right now.
So dark. So dark. So dark.
So
amazing. So dark. So dark.
What a time to be alive. Let's move on.
Super quick. I rarely engage in troll fire. It's a waste of time. It's a time suck, So when you're dealing with somebody with 18 followers who's trying to discredit you guys all the time, I just block and move on. But because I'm tired of the narratives of how they try to discredit you, they weren't coming at me, and I had to jump in. But I realized as I was doing that Twitter's purpose the entire time was to give anonymous or anti-truth, blue checks, an outsized voice, an outsized influence against truth. Because I realized in doing this that somebody without using their name and 18 followers who is assigned, paid by the tweet to disparage you and us, has a platform against people me, for example, with 40 years experience, having been an investigative reporter, Jim, with your experience, Hi-Fi with your technology experience, we actually do have a pretty good grasp on the work that we're doing. And it occurred to me that that's what this has been the whole time. The entire time, this has been an ability to give Tokyo Rose a platform and a bullhorn that is the equivalent of the Allied commanders in World War II. And the reason I bring that up is because that is a quote from Justice John Paul Stevens in his dissent against Citizens United. And it's something that I reported on that a few months ago, and it's something that kind of stuck with me. What Twitter has been and always has been is an ability to give Tokyo Rose equal say and power as the Allied commanders. And so I think when Jim says we are behind enemy lines, we always have been behind enemy lines. Peel away the trappings, and a Russian asset like Donald Trump, a fake rich guy who's been laundering money for the Russians and has been an asset since the 80s, has a bullhorn to spout his untruths as a way to subvert power over truth. So that's just something I wanted to share with you guys.
As somebody who was canceled by Twitter before Elon Musk showed up, I couldn't agree with you more. That place, the whole thing is, it has been there to both sides, everything from the beginning, right? That's the goal. And when it's being managed, at least with a sheen of, wanting democracy, at least it kind of functioned as a way to communicate with between normal people and to get messages out, even though behind it there was always this influence. But now it's not. It's just overt. He's just like, fuck you. You get a check. You don't get a check. It's just arbitrary fortune trolling by a guy with $200 billion.
He's anointing lords. He's declaring who's a peasant, right? And then he's also using it in chaos operations to make people fight. And I mean, and really in technology, when I look at a system, right? When I look at a system, I tend to look at how was it architected originally? Who built it, right? What hardware was bought? Who paid for what? Right? And if we look at Twitter, we have this nihilistic anarchist Jack Dorsey, right? And we have Yuri Milner with a whole big bag full of Russian money. That would give most people pause about what type of system it is that we're working with. But apparently not, which is why the word phrase of the week this week is going to be chaos agent. Now, I know, right? Now, there is no real textbook definition of chaos agent. There's a couple on Urban Dictionary you can look at. Basically, a chaos agent is someone who causes disruption, right? That disruption could be a fun disruption, right? Such as a comedian delivering a punchline right in the middle of a moment. Or it could be something destructive, such as I ran a chaos operation against an information operation destroying my hometown earlier this week on April 18th, as a matter of fact. But what I find interesting is when you look up Agent of Chaos, you do find that the origins of the phrase trace back to an 1895 book, Creation and Chaos in the Primeval Era and the Eschaton, by an Old Testament scholar named Gunkel. And you will find that passage in an article about Elon Musk. So I'm glad to see that people are finally catching on to what he is. I don't want them to say, oh, he's a chaos agent and leave it at that, because chaos agents are incredibly, incredibly dangerous when it comes to destabilizing systems and crashing them.
Thank you for that.
So chaos agent, the historical, all that is awesome. But let me tell you a thing right now: chaos agents are real as fuck. Mm-hmm. Now, the thing with them is they work on different time scales, right? Some chaos agents just show up in your replies and call you names and make you feel like shit and like try and discredit you, and that's, you know, a chaos agent working in like, you know, real time. But some chaos agents, they bury themselves, right? They hide themselves, they cloak themselves in some other shit, right? So that they can infiltrate farther into the system, so that when they're ready to run an operation, they are in a much better and more powerful place to do it, right? Journalists do this. Researchers do this. It happens in academia. It does happen. These people go about their lives as if they're perfectly normal, but underneath there's whatever they're for, whatever motivation, money, ideology, compromising information, or ego, doesn't matter what it is, they have a motivation to fuck up whatever it is that they claim to be part of. So if you go back to the Trump administration, it was a chaos agency, right? It was like every agency was hired by, you know, was run by somebody who wanted to destroy it. Fucking Rex Tillerson, you know, had the Medal of Honor from Vladimir Putin, was put in charge of the Secretary of State.
The USP, the Pentagon.
The Dominionist Mike Pompeo, who the batshit Mike Pompeo, who they put as a CIA director. These are chaos agents. They were there to create chaos from the beginning. They were never there to do anything else. Yeah. But they lurk, they pretend along the way. So it's very important to understand when we're talking about chaos agents, the most effective ones are the ones that are hardest to figure out.
I think that there's still a major disconnect with vast swaths of the American population, that if somebody wrapped themselves in the flag, they must be pro-American. There's still that confusion. And I'm very grateful that Michael McKay is going to give us some very simple slogans to try to help counteract that. Because I think that we are still very freaking naive, because we haven't had these operations run on us as long as other countries have, which is why episode 65 is so important. If you've not seen our episode with our friends from the Czech Republic, please do.
Well, just to be clear, you wrap yourself with the American flag or wrap yourself around Bernie. Either way, right? It doesn't matter what the symbology is, what you're pretending to be, because they pretend to be things across the entire horseshoe. It's a horseshoe all the way around. Every single point on the horseshoe has influence.
Right.
We are being influenced across that whole spectrum, and it's very important to understand.
That is why I'm so distressed over Robert Kennedy Jr., because it's very obvious to us to do this work that he is spouting Kremlin talking points. But everybody who's being so dismissive of him is not looking at the fact that there has been an anti-vax, propaganda movement going on in America for years. They're picking people off still as I speak. And so I think to underestimate just how dangerous that operation is, underestimated at your own risk.
Well, let's connect it to Michael McKay, because Robert fucking Kennedy Jr. was on Tucker Carlson explaining why we should commit to defeat in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because Robert fucking Kennedy, brainwashed anti-vax dipshit, is the guy that should be deciding what our foreign policy with respect to Ukraine is. And Tucker Carlson, Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, who just got fucking sued and lost $1 billion. They're still putting this motherfucker in this Kremlin shit on air.
Right.
By the way, one detail I have to share. Robert Kennedy used a statistic that was altered in the disinformation that Jack Teixeira posted that Donbass Devushka leaked that Joe Flynn knew about before it happened.
One other data,
all the Flynns.
One data point I would like to point out to people who underestimate and trivialize how dangerous operations like this are. Hillary Clinton lost by 70,000 votes. It doesn't take much, a smidge of the population to trick the Electoral College. So I would like people to very seriously involve themselves in the salvation and the labor of democracy moving forward, into 2024, like now. So
yeah,
that's probably,
I mean, they illegally swung a whole hell of a lot more than 70,000 votes.
yeah, but I'm saying, like, when you yes, right.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I'm agreeing with you.
And the other issue, of course, is suppression. When people throw up their hands and say, "Oh, so and so is just the same as somebody else," no, they're not. No, they're not.
Yeah, but I mean, much less saying it's the voting is 3 days from now and it's not, right? Like Douglas MacKay.
Do not fall for these tricks all the time. Do not fall for these tricks all the time. We're gonna see these plays over and over and over again daily moving into 2024. Please be smarter about it. All right.
So to sum up, beware of the chaos agents. Let's do why it matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why high fidelity?
First story this week. Recuse me, Father, for I have sinned. That's right. A federal judge who is overseeing the bankruptcy case of a Catholic diocese in New Orleans has been exposed as having donated almost $50,000 to the diocese himself, yet refuses to recuse himself from a case where over 500 survivors of sexual abuse by the diocese are suing the diocese, and the diocese is trying to declare bankruptcy. Why does this matter? Well, one of the things that autocrats love to corrupt the courts.
Yeah.
And that's why it matters.
Yeah.
Can you fucking believe that? Like,
yes, I can.
I mean, I'm just like.
I have two words for you, Jim. Clarence Thomas.
Well, Clarence, but it's more than that, right? It's 4 years of installing chaos agents.
Yes.
Right? There's 400 federal chaos agents in the judiciary. The only reason you get appointed by Donald Trump during those 4 years is because you're a chaos agent, because the Federalist Society has trained you to be a legal chaos agent against the interests of the United fucking States of America, which is why that judge is going to let those child molesters off.
In 2018, I wrote how Mitch McConnell was the most dangerous man in America. And I wrote that because I was documenting the number of judges he was rushing onto courts all across this country. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I do have a little bit of good news. Next story this week, we're going to talk about Alaska stands, because the Alaska Supreme Court says partisan gerrymandering violates the Constitution. And that is awesome. That is great to hear. What I am worried about is that the Alaskan legislature will pull an Ohio and refuse to abide by the ruling of the court. But for now, good job, Alaska. I'm proud of you.
All right. What's next?
Final story this week. The non-blitzkrieg bop. Because, as we can see, Kremlin is trying to infiltrate the left wing in Germany and build an anti-war coalition. How do they do that? By installing chaos agents inside the movement and to disrupt the German government's support for Ukraine. That's why it matters.
Seems like we got a theme going on of sorts.
Not
Just a
only a
little bit.
theme, but it's like, I can relate here in America to what they're attempting to do there in Deutschland. It's sounds so familiar. I think that is the perfect segue to hellscape.
Jim Stewartson's hellscape. Oh, fuck.
So, on the subject of chaos agents, and on the subject of one of my favorite subjects, Mike Flynn, I wanted to just walk you through a scenario. So, let's say that you have been taking over countries for 30 years, and then you got really pissed off for some reason, and you were kind of a sociopath anyway, and you got turned, and your job became to overthrow the government of the United States of America. Just put yourself in those shoes for a minute. You know all about psyops and irregular warfare and hybrid warfare and how to fuck with elections and all that stuff. And one of the worst people in the world comes to you and says, forget all that democracy. Let's fix the world. You and me, kid. And now all of a sudden you are at war against your own country. I know it's a little hard to imagine, but just bear with me. What would you do? How would you go about overthrowing that country without, and this is important, getting caught? How would you do that? What are the tactics that you might employ? Well, would you infiltrate the government all the way up at the top, for example, like the president? Would you maybe steal a fucking election and hand it to a Kremlin puppet? Would you run an entire overt program? Local action has a national impact to make sure that you have lots and lots of infiltrators and cult members all up and down the government? Would you, I don't know, pay nominal amounts of money in the grand scheme of things to get journalists and researchers and social media personalities to do your bidding, to go about their normal lives being a leftist or a Republican or whatever the fuck they're pretending to be, so that when it's time, they can lash out at the right person or push the right narrative and then go back into their hidey hole again. Ever seen anybody like that out there? They exist. A shitload of them. I'm sorry, but look around. Would you do something like that? I don't know. Probably would. Would you infiltrate law enforcement? Would you run patriotic sheriff constitutional of America and get a bunch of cops to believe your bullshit? Would you do that stuff if you were at war with your own country? Now, let's say somebody came out of the blue and said, wait a second, what are you talking about? It's this fucking guy over here. It's not all these other people that he's pointing you at. It's not them. It's this fucking guy. Look. What would you do? Would you just let him go and make his documentaries and make his groups and and just have a nice day? Probably not. Would you let his podcast with his friends go traipsing along and get all all popular? Probably not. So I'm just saying, if you imagine this scenario, as far-fetched as it might be, you might come to the conclusion that you should arrest Mike Flynn.
Okay, so we are bringing back Michael McKay for the third time. And just so our new viewers know what his background is, Michael has a Ph.D. from the London School of Economics. He has worked and taught in Ukraine and also worked as an international election observer from Kiev, currently living in Canada. He's an incredible geopolitical analyst, but what his gift is, his daily coverage of Russia's invasion of Ukraine for 9 years has been a consistent source of truth, and he's laser focused on using accurate language. As he will tell you, the coverage we've been getting from corporate media has been as if we were in World War II and the reporters were reporting from Berlin as opposed to from London and elsewhere. And so we're going to get right into that with Michael. Let's bring him in. Okay, Michael, we are so glad to have you back on our show. We haven't had too many people back 3 times, so this truly is an honor. We're very, very grateful very much for all the work you do. The other night when I was completely in despair, I found your timeline and I just retweeted everything over and over again until I came out of it. You've always had such a clear view of what is actually going on and has been going on for really the last 9 years. And can you please brief our viewers quickly on your background, and then let's jump right into the war update.
Sure. I have a pretty deep background with Ukraine. I've lived there, worked there, been involved with, I would say, civil society and democratic institutions there since soon after independence, or the renewal of independence. And since the invasion started 9 years ago, I've been very active on social media and elsewhere to comment on the war, because I saw that most media was not getting it right, and certainly not reflecting the point of view of Ukrainians on this conflict, which is, literally life and death for them. And so that's what I thought to, in English, present what Ukrainians are saying to themselves, and then give my analysis on this. That's what I've been.
You've had the clearest take on the failings of the West from anybody that I've read and studied, and I think that's very, very important. Also, I did not know what else to do on the eve of the kinetic phase of the war a year ago, other than call you, and you graciously gave me time and made a lot of predictions. That was the Putin's War of Annihilation article for Byline Times, The Decrepit Empire's Last Stand. And you predicted how this was going to go. You predicted the raping and the pillaging and all of that. Looking back on the year that has passed to now, what are some of the urgent things you would like the Western world and elsewhere really to know about?
Well, on your point, you spoke about my discussion about the failings of the West. The foundation of this is an understanding that Ukraine is the West, that it is very much a Western country, and a failing of other Western pluralist democracies is not to realize this. And basically, for the last century, let's put it that way, to take on the narrative of the invaders, occupiers, and colonizers of Ukraine. And that has been a tragic mistake, to not see the nature of Ukrainian society, its pluralism, its dynamism, its contentious nature, its fundamentally democratic character, which has been overlaid with a foreign autocracy
Yeah.
for so many years. And therefore, when Ukraine defended itself as vigorously as it did, other people in the West were surprised because they had this false narrative. But I was not. And that's why I've also always been optimistic, because I've seen the Ukrainian nation survived even worse trials than we see now. I'm thinking about the Holodomor in 1932-33. I'm thinking about the crushing of the first renewal of independence at the beginning of the 20th century. I'm thinking about the crushing of the insurrection that lasted from 1944 into the late 1950s. And so Ukrainians have seen this and much more, and it's in their DNA to stand against this. So that has been the foundation of my criticism of the West, is not to recognize these things. And I've used words like vanguard. So, vanguard is a military term for those who are in the front and take the brunt of the fighting. And that's what they've literally been doing. And, a lot of the discussion now about aid to Ukraine, I think the right take on this is that it's not humanitarian assistance or being generous in some way. It's actually our own self-defense when you realize that Ukraine is the West and that they are our vanguard. And that's the way I think about that. And it's not just in the military sense. They're a vanguard in civil society. And I've been closely observing things like the Revolution of Dignity in 2013, 2014. I was in Ukraine for the Orange Revolution in 2004. And so I've seen these real expressions of direct democracy, something that we in more institutionalized democracies do not see. But, in Ukraine, because institutions have been basically imposed on them as a forced colony, therefore, democracy in its direct form is the real democracy that Ukrainians practice. And we can see a very vigorous civil society there. And that gives us hope for the trials that we're facing in our own democracies, as we see our institutions failing us in ways that we did not expect. But we're not as used to the direct democracy approach that Ukrainians have almost instinctively.
And before the guys jump in, I want to ask one more thing real quick. You have continually corrected the media on not adopting the words being imposed by the invaders. The media continually reports the words that have come out of the Russia propaganda machine, everything from, separatists or whatever. And you continually say, no, that's not it. We here on this show are always trying to alert people to the cognitive warfare where our minds are the battlefield. I feel like everything that's happening here is part of what will inevitably, depending on how this all plays out, turn into our own kinetic phase. And can you please tell people why words are so important as this coverage is going on? Because we're always everywhere I look, there's incorrect reporting using the authoritarians' language.
Why words are so important? Ultimately, it's because words are action. That's an idea of the philosopher Hannah Arendt, and who talked about words as action, and then she talked about labor and other things. But she put at the top, in the terms of political action, words, because talking about the effect that they have and so on in shaping the narrative. And it's what people think they're doing when they're engaging in action that becomes so important. And that's why I've consciously not used the language of the Russians, but not just saying, oh, it's not true, because there's only so far you can go with that. We all know this is, fighting the trolls and this kind of thing. Oh, no, it's not true. But asserting something else and starting to use another kind of language. So you mentioned things like separatists and so on. Let me just give one other example. just because it was in the news lately. The Chinese ambassador to France said something very foolish about Crimea being originally Russian, and so on, which is, well, first of all, wrong, and second of all, the Russian narrative that they push. So against that, I'll say other things that are true. Crimea is the homeland of the Crimean Tatar people. The Crimean Tatar people have their own culture, their own language, their own religion, which is distinct from most people around them because they're Muslims, and also that they consider themselves Ukrainians, and so of course we're Crimean Tatars, and Crimea is our home. Oh, and we're Ukrainians, and the reason is why, and the reason is the way we all in a pluralist democracy feel at home, and nevertheless assert our individual or subgroup identities within vibrant pluralist democracies. So I just assert these kinds of things and then point out that that the Russian invaders and occupiers, because Crimea is not theirs, are imposing a slow motion genocide on the Crimean Tatars. And then I talk about the 1944 genocide that was carried out by Stalin, and say this is what Putin is doing, but more importantly, the Russian people who are the illegal colonizers of this Ukrainian land that is the homeland of the Crimean Tatars. So that's what I do. That talk about the language as action, and that it's as much a part of the war effort as sending troops to the front. And then assert this other narrative.
Thank you so much. Jim or Hi-Fi, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I have a question. Switching to kind of currently what's happening in Ukraine, obviously there's an enormous amount of propaganda in the United States to talk about the hundreds of billions of dollars that we're sending, and that's being wasted, and all of the bullshit propaganda that we know is out there. My concern right now is that Putin is basically waiting for 2024 to see if he can get another Republican in the White House, which would give him, I think, presumably a lot more freedom to go ahead and with his occupation and move forward beyond that. I was just wondering, what do you see in terms of given that the Ukrainians have been so fierce, right? And it didn't surprise me as much as other people, I guess, but they have been obviously much more formidable than anyone expected. What do you think Putin's strategy is right now, given that there seems to be kind of a stalemate of sorts?
I think there's a fatalism to Putin's strategy. He's doing everything he can do, but he's not a military person. He's actually very poor at that. And he thinks he can solve all his problems with the hybrid warfare, such as cultivating decision makers in every country that he can, but in particular the United States, which he's had some success with. And it's always been delay when he cannot win with forceful action. So what we see is this really insane offensives that have been going on for the last 6 months at least, these crazy infantry assaults with total lack of combined armed warfare, which is positively medieval in its character, which has given no breakthroughs and just modest gains for him. And keeping this up as long as possible as part of the delaying tactic. And yes, it is in this hope of 2024 changing things from the US point of view. But I see this as a kind of irrational fatalism, like Hitler in the bunker when the Russians were all but surrounding Berlin, and he was plotting offensives with troops that weren't there, and this kind of thing. And so there's now nothing left but the propaganda, almost. And we can see that in practical terms, we're all waiting for the Ukrainian counteroffensive and the effect that will have. So I don't think that Putin's strategy, it's not really a strategy, doing the only thing he knows how to do is going to pan out for him.
I hope you're right. Hi-Fi.
So it seems like he's in a war of attrition right now. He's just doing everything he can to break down Ukraine. And as long as the West continues to support Ukraine militarily, he will fail. Eventually, the Russian people will be tired of being sent off to die. But part of the problem I see globally is that the rest of the world is not attending to the matter of Russia in a way that is consistent with dealing with a country that is engaged in war crimes, such as allowing Russia to take the head of the Security Council at the UN. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think the world is taking it seriously at all. And when I see, for example, allowing Russia to take the presidency of the Security Council, which they have this month, when it could have been prevented with a simple veto, this is irresponsible. Only a few countries have declared the Wagner private military company to be a terrorist group. A handful of Eastern European groups, and this is completely irrational. Only a few countries have declared the Russian regime to be a terrorist regime, and my complaint about this is it's not realistic. That's what the epitome of sound politics is supposed to be. Successful, whether it's good or bad, our successful foreign policy is based upon a realistic understanding of the nature of our adversaries, our allies, and so on. We're supposed to be realistic. And so when I see this persistence in a fantasy to say basically that, we'll treat the Russian Federation, which by the way is a false name twice over, as a nation state. But it's not. And not coming to terms with the fact that it's a terrorist regime, that it is a criminal syndicate, that it is these kinds of, that is the, I've called it the residue of an empire as well. These are all its characteristics. Not coming to terms with this, and then not coming to terms with what the perspective I see Ukrainians have. The only result that makes any sense is victory for Ukraine and defeat for the Russian Federation. And the sooner that is brought about, the better. And fear of, unmanageable and outcomes and so on is itself irrational, because that is the nature of war. We do what we can in our circumstances, and we use all our efforts to bring about the desired result. So I think that's why I've tried to credit the United States for its tremendous support for Ukraine, but they are ignoring what Ukrainians are telling them. They said, okay, you expect us to not only defend our country, but to bring about the stated goal, which is the liberation of all Ukrainian territory, and yet you won't provide aircraft, you won't provide long-range artillery, and the excuses for this are based upon a fantasy about the Soviet Union, which hasn't been true for over 30 years. And so the lack of realism is a real threat. The sticking with illusions, and you pointed out one. The Russian Federation is a permanent member of the Security Council. So no, just stop it from being a permanent member from the Security Council.
Yeah, right. Thank you so much for that. There's so much to absorb. The residue of an empire. That is so brilliant.
Can I?
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I want I wanted to follow up on what you said about cultivating decision makers, especially in the United States. I think you said that Putin has had some success. I would argue that he's had an incredible taking the entire Republican Party and turning it into, largely an arm of the Kremlin. I was wondering if you saw it that way as well from where you.
I do. I do. So I guess I was being modest calling it some success. It is substantial success. I've called it elite capture, and that's a good term for it. And what I saw happening, the key year was 2016. That's when things came together. So there was a long-term effort to capture the Republican Party. We know that the cultivation of Donald Trump began long before that, in the 1980s, in fact, under the Soviet Union. But at that time there was an open question whether he would end up being a Democrat or Republican or what. And it's kind of interesting, but explainable why the Republican Party ended up being the chosen target. But anyway, 2016 was the key year because that's when elite capture of the Republican Party was completed. That's when at the Republican National Committee, the only resolution was an anti-Ukraine one. And we saw the last of the influencers of the old Republican Party. I sometimes refer to them as what Richard Nixon called the cloth coat Republicans. Remember, his checkers speech, that's going way back. But it is a kind of Republican that used to have a place, a quiet conservatism that had its home in the Republican Party. And there's no space for those people in the Republican Party anymore, as it's been radicalized beyond recognition. It's whatever it is by no means a conservative political party. And so elite capture was completed then. And don't forget, in 2016 was also the year of the Brexit referendum. And we saw that the Russians illegally financed vote leave. And they got away with this incredible operation because of this legal loophole that the referendum wasn't legally binding. Therefore, it didn't have to be legally conducted. And so when the elites who were compromised chose to take Britain out of the EU with this advisory referendum, the fact that it was illegally financed had nothing to do with that. The courts couldn't touch it, kind of thing. And this was a very effective movement. And a more minor thing that I was commenting on at the time in 2016 was the referendum in the Netherlands about the Game Peel, a kind of comedy joke site, sponsored this under the Netherlands' very strange referendum laws. And although it was against the association agreement with Ukraine, even though an association agreement was extended to Moldova at the same time, but they weren't mentioned at all in this referendum, and it narrowly won. And it became very difficult for the Netherlands to sign on to EU sanctions, mild as they were. So there was a real coordinated effort. And then I commented in my own country, Canada, there was really not much effect at that time, but we saw it come around with the convoys and the occupation of Ottawa and things like that, and it tied in with the January 6th and this whole effort. But this is just how this effort morphs and morphs. But to get back to your point about elite captures, that's the key. You do get the elite capture, and the disinformation will take care of the apparent followers.
Wow, that is exactly where. That is exactly what we've been just, trying to hammer home over and over and over again on our show. You also mentioned that not only is Russia open about this. This isn't an article where I'm citing you. You said there's no secret. It's not like a spy movie. The Russians will buy off journalists, newspapers, media empires, the press in Britain, to ensure the success of Brexit. So you not only have the elite capture of the Republican Party in the US, where you called it its most successful operation, but large segments of our press. He just needs Tucker Carlson and he's got him. That was something you said over a year ago. Every single time I see a clip from Tucker Carlson, there is another Kremlin propagandist trying to reputation wash themselves or somebody else. Can you comment on what you're seeing in the press and the elite capture of the press here as well?
Yeah, well, the elite capture of the press, it's so multifaceted. And don't forget that Russians spends more resources on this than they do on their conventional military. You know, like money, buying off journalists and sponsored websites and so on. I observed in the 2016 election, at the time it was going on, I said a lot of the Trump support is actually Macedonian teenagers. Yeah. And it was true, right? Yeah. Because anyone can set up a website and plaster some American flags on it and just put some content that was written by somebody else and so on. And then it becomes an echo chamber. And, you've observed that and others have as well. But the disinformation campaign, in terms of the established media, it was by focusing on the fact that the conventional media was Moscow-based and not Kiev-based, and exploiting that so that they would pick up on this language and not get the other language. So it's as if we were reporting World War II from Berlin, but we had no reporters in London.
I'm sorry, but that is so true. That's exactly what we're seeing. Oh my God. Brilliant.
And it's insane, right? And that's what we've got with the conventional media. In terms of social media, I think the first target that Putin took out was Facebook, and it was very easy to. It's very easy to take over these companies that are owned by individuals who are megalomaniacs in one way or the other. So, in 2015, there was a just horrific episode where President President Poroshenko wrote to Facebook, to Mark Zuckerberg, and asked that Facebook stop silencing and banning Ukrainians on the platform as they talked about the war, because they would use some, depiction of violence, criticism or something for any Ukrainians who talked about the war, and stop amplifying Russian propaganda and narratives. And there's a video of a meeting at Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg reading out this letter and he and their staff laughing. And I was chronicling how Ukrainians were dying and, in Donbass at the time. And there were some, shelling every night. And I was been chronicling it like almost for 9 years, and just horrific. And we can see more recently Twitter as it gets controlled by another oligarch who is, anti-democratic, to put it mildly, and easily susceptible. And I've also criticized Musk as being a nihilist, which suits Russia just fine. It doesn't have to be a pro-Russia narrative. It just needs to be an anti-truth narrative, and that's enough for Russia.
I would like to point out something. I would like to point out that you discussed Facebook. A man who was recently sanctioned by the United States named Alisher Usmanov had a bagman named Yuri Milner who paid millions of dollars into Facebook. And I believe that may have led to instances like you're speaking of, as well as, you talk about American oligarchs or oligarchs in America. Peter Thiel, who is a close friend of Elon Musk, was, the initial investor in Facebook. And it seems to be this network of compromised billionaires who are doing this. But my question for you is, we talk a lot about hybrid warfare and about the words and the propaganda and, the lies that are being pushed on Twitter and the lies that are being pushed on Facebook and how the truth is being suppressed on Facebook. But what I want to say is you can cut through the fog of hybrid warfare simply by looking at the actions of the participants. And it seems to me that Russia has committed war crimes. They are kidnapping children. They are raping women. They are torturing captured Ukrainian soldiers. What would you say to the world to get them to realize this?
Pay attention. Pay attention when people like me report on the simple facts of the war, and step back and look at the big picture and say, this is what's really going on. So for example, I really appreciate your point about all of the hype around hybrid warfare, but we need to look at facts and what's really going on. And I'll take as an example the most intensive battle in Ukraine right now, which is around the city of Bakhmut. And I said, well, what's really going on there? What's really going on is the Russians are making very slow progress through this city. They're now in the central part of the city. And it's like one block in a day, which they may or may not lose overnight, but it's been this slow advance. And the cost, well, first of all, who's making these advances? Overwhelmingly, the Wagner private military group, this terrorist group, made up of convicts. That's who these soldiers are. They're prisoners who have been paroled and driven to the front. So they have no military training. There's no armored support, there's no air support, and their casualties are horrendous. Over the past 2 weeks, for example, 500 to 600 killed a day, primarily in Bakhmut, but also around the city of Donetsk. And that's the reality. And when they do capture territories, the consequences for Ukrainians who are not able to flee is, as you point out, horrific. Rapes, brutality, theft of identity, forced passportization, indoctrination of children, kidnapping of children. This is the war crime for which Putin and the so-called humanitarian commissioner have been charged by the International Criminal Court. So it's pointing out these simple facts. This is what's really going on in the war. And then to say, you know what? Russia's not going to win this war. This is all that they can do. And if this is the most that they can do, and we've only seen the start of what Ukraine can do. So just highlighting these facts and saying, pay attention.
I love that. They're not going to win the war. I love that. I love that. Just like simple things like that. So what I want to bring up real quick, and then we'll go to Jim, is in the rolling insurrection piece that I did, which you guys were all, major, you contributed to it really brilliantly. I think that there is still a disconnect in people trying to understand that Russia is at war with Western nations, cognitive war, kinetic war, however you want to, put it. And what you did in one sentence was tie it all together. You talked about the unreason we're seeing in public life, the amplification of irrationality. But what you did is you tied together the Tatushky renta mobs in Ukraine, the Trump MAGA insurrectionists in the US, the Freedom Convoy in Canada, the Bolsonaro insurrectionists in Brazil, and the worldwide anti-vax, anti-mask COVID conspiracists. And you said what they have in common is a violent antipathy to constitutional democracy and a lack of belief that a shared truth of human experience can even exist. And that is what Russia has been imposing on the West. And how do we cut through the noise to get people to understand this is part of the same operation, this anti-truth operation? What is the inoculation to it?
Well, it's of course relentless education, and as I said, presenting the facts. But I think another point, and we can take some comfort in this, is that we have been here before, and things like the technology, like the age of the internet, may change the shape of it, but we have been here from before, and we've overcome it. And what I like to do in a lot of my commentary is to make comparisons. For example, that quote you just gave is comparing different events that ultimately have different sources, different grievances, and so on. But what ties them together is how Russia has a common interest in pouring gasoline on these existing flames. I've always criticized people saying, "Oh, Russia didn't cause racism in America and stuff like." Well, of course not, right? But they didn't need to, right? They just need to say, like when a very worthy movement comes along, like Black Lives Matter. See, we just need to go back a little bit. That's kind of off the headlines now. But this very worthy movement talking about police violence and Black Lives Matter, and then picking up on these fringe groups that would, that were at heart racist, but against this, and just exacerbate this,
Right.
inflame it, and so on. But my point about we been here before, I made a quote a while ago about Putin saying Crimea is and always will be Russia. And I gave a quote in the same comment about Hitler saying Danzig, today Gdansk, is and always will be a German city. And people who don't know history say, well, what are you talking about? And said, we all know that Germany invaded Poland. He says, do we? Because that's not what German propaganda said at the time. The Germans said that propaganda said that Poland attacked the Danzig corridor, and that they were saving Germans in this native German city, today Gdansk in Poland. And we'll say today, well, that's not true. Who would believe that? And the answer is, well, everyone in Germany believed it, right? And a lot of foolish commentators in the West believed it as well. We're kind of there too.
God, you just given us so much good stuff, Jim.
So the Nazi myth, right? You see it all the time. Ukrainian Nazis and Azov and all this nonsense about how there's such a giant Nazi problem in Ukraine, when the blatant fact is that the Nazis are on the other side. that Wagner group, they go around with Nazi paraphernalia, right? All of their hidden. One thing I try and do all the time is try and clarify in people's minds that is projection of the highest possible order, right? You got a country that just wants to be free, and somehow this propaganda, gets mainstream that there's, this is a Nazi regime. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and when we hear things like that, all we get from our media, and it's laziness, it's not necessarily maliciousness, is reporting about people who said this, Russian sources and so on. And again, I don't, there's not much point in saying, oh, that's not true. But I would point out other things that are true. For example, I was an election observer in 2014 in Ukraine. And two right-wing parties, we can call them fascist, together for their candidate garnered 2% of the vote in the national election. And you step back, oh, this is terrible. Actually, that's really good for a pluralist democracy, that 2% of the people who vote for fascists. And then we can contrast this with right-wing, extreme right-wing in other countries that have had more success than that. AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen and her party in France, and we can go to other examples. And, in the United States, I read a just very disturbing article about the prominence of 3%ers and people like that in the Department of Defense, which is very discouraging. That there's this kind of inability to defend national interest against freedom of association and freedom of speech, which is so. Anyway, that weakness is exploited very well by foreign interests. Anyway, so that's my response to this. And Azov isn't fascist and so on. It says no. Azov, for example, today is a unit of the territorial defense force of Ukraine, which has about 100 similar units. It's the equivalent of like the National Guard in the United States. And so just put it in perspective by giving facts.
So what I would like from you, since you are so good, you've given me so many phrases that I live by. The fake rich guy, Trump is a fake rich guy. No one ever said that. And you said all money launderers are fake rich guys. Like, you have a way of just cutting through the noise brilliantly. I would love for you to give us like 3 or 4 or 5 slogans, things that you use all the time that we can repurpose and we can put out in our work. Everything from Russia's going to lose the war to whatever first floats to your mind.
Well, just about Trump being just another fake rich guy. A quote, I first started paying attention to Trump in 2015 when he went on. This is when Russia really started to put force behind its Trump for president effort to present, this person who is really crazy as a candidate, to start to fake that there was this support for him. And he gave this crazy comment about Ukraine. And I saw this, and I didn't really know or care about this guy until that point, until he started to make these wrong comments about Crimea, which were frankly used entirely Russian language. I thought, okay, there's no way he came up with this. And then I used the phrase, Trump to Putin is just another Yanukovych. And that is what I have seen all along. And that understanding has done me very well.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, oh, but Trump isn't a Russian agent and stuff like that. Says, no, I'm talking about what Trump is to Putin, right? Mm-hmm. So forget what he is to Americans, which is a lot of things. Just say, well, what is he to Putin? He says, a useful idiot, someone who can be exploited with mm-hmm. varying degrees of success. And that's all he is to him. An agent of influence or useful idiot.
Oh, well, it's just like, just another Yanukovych, okay, with the same handler, with
the
Manafort, the same handler. Like what is the disconnect, people? What is the disconnect?
And how could you not see this? I dive again, like I didn't want to care about Donald Trump, right? But I was kind of forced to, like all citizens of the world. And I said, oh, he looks like a New York real estate guy, but he's just a grifter. And then Yanukovych looks like a Donetsk businessman, city of Donetsk, but he's just a grifter. Uh-huh. In fact, and they've been in the courts. Yanukovych actually served a bit of time in prison, for which he, made the records disappear.
Always a good look for a useful idiot.
And the parallels just go on and on.
On. So that's a good one. So Trump to Putin is just another Yanukovych. So that's a good one. Give us a few more.
The Russian Federation is not a nation state. It is a terrorist regime. That's a good one.
That's a great one.
Ukraine is the vanguard of the West. It is a quintessentially European country.
Thank you for that. That's beautiful.
Because I want to say something positive here.
No, we need this desperately. I need this. You see, like I'm like refueling right here, recharging off of your energy.
The only outcome to this war that makes any sense is victory for Ukraine and the liberation of all territory occupied by the Russian terrorist state.
Fantastic. Okay, I love that.
That's also something I believe. I don't know when it will happen, but it's the only result that makes any sense, and the only result that will lead to a lasting peace.
A lasting peace and also a future on this planet. I mean, we always, probably don't talk enough about how so much of what we're seeing is driven by fossil fuels, fossilized set who do not want to see a future of renewables, which we so desperately need.
Another point I want to make, and I've tried to make it many times, Ukrainians have agency. Russia is invading. Ukrainians are defending their land and their people. So I always criticize people who use this horrible term proxy war and so on. No, it's a direct war, and that's another quote. It's a direct war, and Ukraine has allies, which gives different levels of support. So it's very much like any other war in history, but it's certainly not a proxy war.
And Hi-Fi, one more question, take us out.
Final question is, I remember what I wanted to ask earlier. You mentioned the infiltration of the Department of Defense by the 3%ers and these extremist groups and whatnot. I would argue that these extremist groups are being exploited by Putin, if not directly financially benefiting, propaganda benefits, I mean, all sorts of things. But these individuals have infiltrated our law enforcement and our intelligence community. And how does our government recover from that? How do we cleanse ourselves of this infection and move forward?
By being realistic about this. So let's look long term. The effect of what these people end up doing is treason. And how historically have Russian aggressors fostered treason in their adversaries? For most of the 20th century, it was ideology. So you could find people who were committed communists and believed that the seat of the communist revolution was in the Soviet Union, and that was the motivation. So, for example, the Cambridge spies, phobia, people like that, ideology. And then later on, maybe by the 70s, this kind of waned a little bit, and it became finance. It was about money. People could be bribed and bought. Sometimes for surprisingly little amount of money. One of the spies I remember put in a swimming pool, and I just thought, oh my gosh, like, that's it, And now we see people who will betray the United States for followers. And I thought, this is incredible. They'll impress their friends, they'll boost their follower count, they'll get what Marshall McLuhan called their 15 minutes of fame, but it's barely that. And that's actually the motivation. So the defense has to say, well, let's take care of that and overcome this wall around social media and say, oh, that's free speech. We can't touch that. And say, well, yes, it's free speech, but it's also been weaponized by the adversaries of the United States. And you can't ignore that. So you have to look at the motivations of people now. And interestingly, it's not ideology. They're nihilists. They're not really ideological. And it's not money, mostly. And when it is, it's like pitiful amounts of money. So it really can't be that. And it is these other intangibles that are very important to people. And you need to address that.
Thank you so much for that. And I do have one last thing. When I did the piece last year about what Musk purchasing Twitter really meant, and other media was all, oh, what an idiot paying so much. We knew, this team here knew that's not what it was. You said Elon Musk is turning Twitter into VKontakte, the Russian information warfare outlet disguised as a social media platform. 100% correct. I've been quoting you for 6 months. Anything you want to add to that?
Just how sad it is that I was right. you know, look, just this week, the wiping away of the legacy verified, which, although it had its flaws, had some measure, at least, of prominence. Oh, did you see today that he's kind of forcing an organizational verification, and all these right-wing groups, Britain First, horrific organization, got one of these gold check marks. And then after his little faux pas with government-funded media, removing it from everybody, which really goes to the benefit of the Russian and Chinese disinformation outlets.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you know, if people do look at NPR on Twitter, they already know what it is, but they don't know what these many, you know, these disinformation outlets, they're like shell corporations for the organized crime, right? There's just endless numbers of them to figure out what's really going on. So how very sad it is that it is VContact, but that it has more reach and that it has more power, and that this possibility that the internet always had of being a forum for the free exchange of ideas, it could be an institution of civil society. And yet now we see, those of us who still are on Twitter, it's warfare, isn't it?
Yes.
You know, we're info warriors, whether we like it or not.
Yes.
So despite all of that, I do try to be positive. I do try to present facts, make contrasts, and look at the big picture, which I remain optimistic. I don't want to put timelines on it. I'm hopeful, as well as being optimistic. Certainly, I'm very hopeful about the coming counteroffensive, because I believe it has to succeed for all of us, and I think we need to realize that. But overall, Twitter, it's just a sad spectacle.
I just want to thank you so much for the work that you do and have been doing for 9 years. You've been documenting the war for 9 years, daily, relentlessly. If anybody wants to know where to go for truth to cut through the anti-truth, it is your Twitter feed, your Mastodon feed, and that is at Can you tell people where to find you?
At MHMCK.
Thank you so much. Yeah, like I said, I go there when I'm feeling low. I'm like, I need some truth. I need an injection of truth. Better find Michael. Michael, thank you so much for your work. Anything else we want to say before we let Michael go back to his lovely day here?
Yeah, a few more reports to write and so on, but I just want to say just a word of praise for the Ukrainian people. That my admiration for the Ukrainian people has grown enormously over the past 9 years, and even more over the past year. And I have a fellow feeling for what they're doing and what they're facing that drives me. But under it, there's a respect and an admiration that I hope that comes through in what I write.
Absolutely. Slava Ukraine.
Slava
Thank you
Ukraine.
thank you so much.